Hello, and welcome to the John Burt Leadership Podcast. If you're listening to this podcast, most likely you're interested in enhancing your leadership skills to navigate the disruptive changes that you face every day. I'm your host, John Burt, an executive leadership coach. My aim is to provide you with new insights and a fresh perspective on leadership through conversations with my incredible guests, sharing thoughts, ideas, and experiences on leadership. My hope is that this will enable you to contribute, to grow and adapt and become a more impactful leader, ultimately contributing to making your organization and the world a better place. So let's dive in. Today's episode is Thrive in Uncertainty, Embrace Change, and Lead with Confidence. Today's leaders are faced with an unprecedented level of volatility and uncertainty in the environment that tests their abilities, confidence, and resilience. Rapid changes in the geopolitical landscape, capricious economic tariffs, and rapid advancement in technology, including those of AI, are just a few of the disruptive challenges that we must deal with. Unrelenting change has become the new norm, and leaders need to stop trying to control the chaos and learn to ride the storm. In a recent study of business leaders, 32% said that they felt paralyzed by uncertainty when it comes time to act. Even more problematic is 42% said that they have been putting off thinking about decisions because it's uncomfortable. We all know that hesitation and delays in decision-making can have a devastating impact on the organization's competitive position and their bottom line. It's an imperative that business leaders across the spectrum must learn to be more agile, embrace change, and become more resilient in order to thrive in this uncertainty. But what does it take for a leader to be successful? What skills and mindset are most important? How does one move from just survive to thrive in the storm? My guest today is Christina Zinni, a successful leadership coach and light liberator. Listen in as we explore how leaders can learn to view change more positively, frame challenges as opportunities, and be more tolerant of uncertainty for long-term success. Christina, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Don, it's great to be back.
It's always wonderful to talk to you. You always bring such great insights, Christina, and I'm certain the topic today will be one of those. You and I have talked a lot about I don't know, there's a lot of hyperbolic language out there about the chaotic times, uncertain times, and we've even started adding in adjectives on top of that, the extreme uncertainty or the exponential change that's going on. But you think about the leaders that are trying to navigate all of this with their teams and maybe for themselves. That'll be the focus today of our conversation. Some of the things that we've been talking about before we started today. But before we get there, I want to just give people a little bit of your background because some people this will be the first podcast they're listening into, and you have such a fabulous background. So I want to make sure we get to that. So Christina is a leadership coach with over 25 years of global experience coaching and developing people and driving transformational change. She built a successful career as a management consultant and a professional development leader with PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and IBM. And that IBM is where actually I met Christina when we were both working overseas. Her passion for helping people, particularly women, advance their careers and elevate their leadership is what prompted her to launch her own leadership coaching firm. The firm's name is She Dreams Big over a decade ago. A self-described light liberator, and I love the light liberator. Christina helps her clients deepen their self-awareness, unlock their potential, and amplify their leadership presence. She's a proud mom of 3, and her family currently live in Houston, Texas. So welcome again.
Thank you, John.
Anything you want to add to that? I know you've got so much going on that anything that's like current and you want to share.
Absolutely. Thanks for that warm welcome back and introduction. So what I'd like to just highlight about my background that I think is especially relevant to our conversation today is that fundamentally my entire career has been about change. facilitating large scale organizational change, driving transformations. And now the work that I do in executive and leadership coaching is very much about individual change within the leader that then, of course, supports them in leading change within their organization. And so while I tend to focus on my coaching work, I also continue to work in consulting and supporting organizations, with their organizational changes and their talent development. And I have a couple of current contracts with two fantastic business schools. I coach through UCLA's Anderson School of Management, and then I also coach through University of Michigan, my alma mater, Go Blue, through the Ross Executive Education. And through those contracts, as well as the work that I do with ASAP, which is a leadership development company, I'm able to work with today's emerging and current leaders from really around the world and supporting their leadership development, their executive growth, and their ability to really show up, drive change, respond to the volatility and the uncertainty that has now come to be just part of our daily lives.
Well, that's wonderful, Christina. And I know the background and some of the work you're doing, and it's just fabulous to see how many people you're helping, and in different facets. And this idea that leaders, their whole role, right? Companies hire them because they have change going on, whether it's self-imposed or imposed externally. Leadership, we need to develop those leaders so that they can tackle those challenges as they come at them. So thank you for that. So coming back to this topic about change and volatility and uncertainty that we talk about, think about we've always had change, right? I mean, every generation will talk about the fact that they're dealing with so much change and it's so fast and and it's chaotic and all these types of words. Um, but what makes today's environment different in your mind?
Great point. So I was looking into, the term VUCA. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And that term was coined, well over 20 years ago to describe what was then considered to be turbulent times. And then when we think back over the last, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years, we've heard that term used quite a bit in association with the pandemic and with geopolitical changes and climate change and economics. And now I just have started to realize that this is just the status quo, right? This is indeed the world that we're living in. And what I think makes, the current times where we're in May of 2025 unique is, of course, technology and just how that rapidly evolves and that accelerates change across a world like this.
Hmm.
AI has actually been around for a long time, but just the adoption of it, right, is dramatically increased. And we're seeing it used in all aspects of our personal lives and our work lives. And so technology remains like a huge driver of change and requires us to be constantly adapting and evolving and pivoting. And then, of course, we have other external forces, right? Things that are happening in our world, in our environment, in our economic and political landscape that are influencing change as well. And again, it feels like perhaps it's the speed of change of these external forces that feels like it's ratcheted up a little bit, right?
Hmm.
And so that's where, again, coming back to what is really required of us leaders is that we remain agile, right? It's the leaders who can succeed in these environments are those that are able to remain agile, open, curious, that's those sort of growth, infinite mindsets, and can innovate and pivot quite quickly, right? And can
Hmm.
lead their organizations to do just that.
Yeah, thinking about the need for leaders to become or be agile in that respect and flexible. The change, the rapid and the degree of change really puts a lot of pressure on them. And the idea that many leaders feel like they need to have all these answers and they need to be able to, be able to tell the solution or have the solutions up front for their teams. Otherwise, they might feel like they're a little bit out of, not playing their role. But in fact, no leader can have all the answers in today's environment. And this idea about being open and curious and willing to listen to their teams and to maybe show some empathy is really important in terms of the environment that we're in. I read a study recently that was done by, or a paper that was done by MIT Sloan, and it talked about through the last 20 years that they've been doing this study, they were talking about the different factors that influence profitability in companies. And he said for the first time, the 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 factors that are influencing the variability of profitability within companies, publicly held companies, is in fact these external contextual type of problems or situations like the geopolitical, as you mentioned. It could be climate. It could be the economy outside of the control of the executive. So not only have executives don't have the answers, but they will be bombarded with this change that's outside of their control.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And, that's, I'm sure, what keeps a lot of leaders up at night, right? Is knowing that so much of this is outside of their control. So when I work with leaders, especially those that are quite senior, right, in top positions of the leadership, we come back to what I consider the foundational elements of leadership. We talk about first and foremost their well-being, right? Their
Mm,
overall health. And that's always an important component to remember is that, we are only as effective of leaders when we're well rested and we're hydrated and we're nourished and we're managing our own stress levels, right? That those are the sort of pillars that support our success as leaders. So I always like to talk with leaders about how when there's times of heightened stress and things feel very uncertain, out of our control, go back to the basics, right? Go back to the basics of your own well-being and encouraging that in the people around you, and then go back to the basics of your organization's values and culture, right? Knowing that, if they're well thought through, right, those should be sort of steadfast and timeless values that in times of uncertainty, you can come back to what you know to be true, right? And hopefully your employees feel the same, that they know those values to be true, and that you can focus on how do we live those values in this environment? How do we focus on um, living and being our culture and executing against our strategy, doing what we know we do best, right? And then that's kind of bringing back that element of control, and then looking at ways and really listening into the organization for ideas as to how do we navigate through these
mhm.
external forces that are impacting our business. How do we show up and try to potentially anticipate and get ahead of them, but how are we also responding to them? I'm going to stop there because I'm really curious to hear what's coming up for you, because you've been working with so many leaders around the world for the course of your career as well.
Yeah, I love what you said about leaders taking care of themselves first. I mean, there's a couple of different things you mentioned, like starting with the leaders taking care of themselves first. Many leaders tend to kind of like work and burn candle at both ends, as they say. But the leaders that seem to really thrive in environments like this are ones that have their routine. And maybe it's a workout routine or a meditation, or it's, some sort of a self-care type of routine that keeps them grounded. Even though there's change and there's activities, things that are going on around them, they're able to ground themselves in both their routine, but also the values that they have They center their thinking and their work and the mindsets that they have in those values, regardless of what's happening around them. The second thing I think that I picked up was this idea that as you're leading the change, the having the team get grounded in a strong culture where you're talking about the values that you have, right? That despite the changes that are going on around you, you're going to adhere to the values and to the strong culture that you have as a company. Not that you're going to promise everybody that nobody's going to lose their job or that problems are going to go away, but you may have values of transparency and honesty and open communication and having empathy for each other. These types of values will can be sustained even though there are very, very chaotic times. You mentioned the work that I think we both have done with large companies and around the globe for years now. Those are the traits that I think I've seen with executives that really stand out in my mind is the ones that are valued, or what do you used to call it, principle-based leadership, where you're talking about what are the principles or the values that we adhere to or that we um, want to shape our behaviors around.
Yeah, as I was preparing for our conversation today, I was naturally thinking about, IBM, which we
Mhm.
know each other, and we both had many years working for that great organization, and just so many best practices I observed from the leaders that I was working with, and I ran a large scale sort of change oriented project out of our corporate headquarters. So I was exposed to some of the most senior leaders within IBM. And what I noticed with them is indeed they had ways in which they could care for themselves so that they were well regulated, right? So that they were regulating their own stress levels, their well being. They were filling their own cup first, knowing that, when they're adequately filled, they're able to pour into others and pour into the organization. So I noticed that as indeed as a best practice. And that, of course, comes up with a lot of other leaders that I'm working with today is filling your own cup first and having that healthy routine and focusing on your own mindset and really
Mhm.
putting yourself into a place of growth mindset and infinite thinking and curiosity over certainty. And then being able to show up and really communicate out the messages around the values, around the history and the culture of the organization, right? And illustrating how we've navigated through difficulties in the past, lots of challenges. We've come out on top, we've adapted, we're going to get through this as well. A big piece of communication, I think, is actually around listening. So oftentimes
Mhm.
leaders seem to think when I'm communicating, I have to be the one delivering the message. And like you said at the start, I have to be the one with the answers. I have to have all the answers. People are looking for me for guidance, to have the answers, to have this all figured out. I really like to come back again to the basics of just simply showing up, holding space, and listening to the people around you, listening to what's on their mind. What are their concerns? What ideas do they have? What barriers can you help to remove that will enable them to continue doing what they do well? What's needed for the company to continue to succeed and to meet its goals. So there's a really big like listening and
Mhm.
sort of disbursement of decision making that I think is critical during times of rapid change. And then when a leader is the one that's communicating a message, to be able to do so in a way that's transparent and also a way that is authentic, that it's okay to admit when you simply don't know or you don't have all the answers yet, but that, you're working through it, you're open, You want to hear from them. You want to keep those lines of communication and acknowledging like the other leaders and experts that are around you, right? Recognizing that it's not just about the CEO, it's about the entire team, the leadership team. And then, the leaders that sit underneath those, like, really all the way down to the first line level of management. All of these people, are leaders in an organization and can be part of the communications and really just, again, listening and then leading with authentic messaging around what we do know, right? And being honest about what we don't know, but conveying that trust of like, we can figure this out together.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned, Christina, that was this idea about listening, and I do believe that what I've seen with really good leaders is that they will acknowledge the chaos, right? Just an acknowledgement to say yes, tariffs as an example, it's caused a lot of turbulence in companies. So you say, well, okay, well, yes, they're going. Tariffs have had a major impact and may have a even stronger impact on us in the future. I think by trying to sugarcoat it or by avoiding the conversation, leaders lose a little trust with their employees. So the ones that are actually able to get out in front of it and say, yeah, it's this is something that's unprecedented. We're gonna deal with this together. So the acknowledgement and maybe showing the empathy for people whose 401ks or their retirement savings have kind of maybe had taken a major hit, or may have lost their job, or maybe they may have lost funding for an important project that they were looking for. But acknowledging that this happened, and then even if you don't have all the answers, you don't have the full plan. It's not necessary, right? But it's what I think what people are looking for is they want to believe that you're looking at it, that you have considered, and you have a strategy for how you're going to approach the problem, and sort of guide them out, knowing that as things develop, you may have to change that strategy, but you know, giving them some glimpses into where your thinking is at, so that they know. I mean, people look to their leaders for this guidance. They want to know that the leader has been thinking about it and what they've been thinking about it. Um, it's a delicate balance, I know, but many leaders, they want to go hide under a rock somewhere and hope that the storm blows over and that everything's going to be fine. Well, that's not leadership, right? The leaders who can stand out there, acknowledge a perhaps a very desperate situation, and then start to show some strategic thinking in terms of what are the options that the company is considering? What are the different pathways or solutions that we're considering, and we're gathering data on? That may be enough for executives to just share that much. The people go, okay, I'm in safe hands with I have a competent leadership team. It's an unprecedented situation. I don't expect them to have all the answers, but at least they're thinking about it, right? I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And obviously, we can't blame the leaders for wanting to go hide under a rock, because there's indeed, again, so much that is unprecedented. We've used that word before, but is coming at leaders from all different directions and presenting all different challenges, and constantly here in the US, really just changing rules around certain aspects of our business. And I 100% agree that, the communication element is really the key, and being able to share that vision and the options, what you do know, inviting in other opinions and ideas, right? That demonstrates that growth mindset, that curiosity, and then meeting people with empathy, right? Really focusing on the human experience and acknowledging like there's going to be a wide range of emotional responses to situations like we've been experiencing, well, in the last few months, but certainly over the last several years, if we're going back to the pandemic. and acknowledging that it's important to just create spaces for people to share that, to talk things through. And that can be done either with managers or members of leadership, but also through, mental health services, through coaching, through ERGs within an organization. There's a lot of different ways that we can support the people on the ground who might be
Mhm.
most affected by this. And as leaders really show up for them and acknowledge, the the impact and the potential for these emotional responses, and give space and really just again meet them sort of on a very human level.
So we talked about the idea of acknowledging the situation, hearing people, listening, giving them space and having empathy for them. We also talked about this idea of communicating, making sure that you're as a leader, you're communicating. I saw a study recently that said that leaders are 10 times more likely to be criticized for under communicating than over communicating. And I find this interesting because many leaders tend to get in their own like bubble, thinking that they have communicated. But many of the leaders I work with acknowledge that they could be communicating more and maybe in different ways because not everybody hears the message in the same way. So over communicating, getting out and making sure that you're visible, that you're talking to your people. I think that's a key element. You don't have to be the most eloquent speaker, right? You don't have to be a TED Talk level person, but I think that people want to hear from their leaders. They want to hear what they have to say and get regular updates. I'm reminded of when we were going through the pandemic. It was Cuomo, the Governor Cuomo, was having daily briefings. Now we were here in California. I was here in California. He's in New York, but it was televised nationally, and he was giving an update. And I got to tell you, I was listening to that every day because he was providing information about something that was going on. He was providing a valuable service to all the people around him just by being on TV, in the public eye, giving as much information as he had, right? Maybe not perfect, maybe not 100% accurate in all cases, but he was willing to put himself in a position where every day he was out talking to people, trying to reach them at their level. And I thought that was really important.
Yeah, it's so
Um,
funny you mentioned that. I was thinking about the exact same example, John. So you and I were on the same wavelength, but I was also thinking of the fact that he was also casually dressed, right? He was just sort of showing up like sleeves rolled up. And oftentimes, if I use other examples from the news, here in Houston, we've had a number of natural disasters and
mm,
hurricanes and flooding, and you often see, government officials, again, they're giving updates. They're casually dressed. They're perhaps not the most eloquent or poised. They don't have it all figured out, but they're showing up, right? And
mhm.
they're showing up and sharing what they can share, and really just again building that trust with the public in this case, that they're doing what they can, that there's questions that are still unanswered, that they're working to answer, problems they're working to resolve, here are the resources available, and so forth. So you're right about over communicating. And I also like to think about the fact that in the case of a CEO, a leader of an organization, that person can indeed leverage their leadership team, right? And again, ensure
Mhm.
that they're not just the sort of sole source of all communications. Their organization is indeed hearing from them, but they're also hearing from other members of the leadership team, and that message, those messages are like cascading down, right? As I said, through the levels of leadership, and getting into the to really the hands, and voices of the first line managers, who are in turn really the feet and the voices on the ground of the organizations, reaching out to the people, and being there to not only convey messages, but again actively listen and offer that, supportive space and those resources to employees as they're navigating through, whatever the implications are of, for an event or external factors that go well beyond their control.
Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit, Christina, and talk about something that you opened up with, and that is the change element. And we both have worked with the numbers of executives related to and transformation initiatives. And I think that being comfortable with change, being able to anticipate change, plan for change, is something that is helps to create the mindset, but also helps for successful executives. Executives that are always looking to try to create the stability and a calm environment versus those that are anticipating and almost challenging themselves as to what would they do if, right? What will happen if? And they're working out some of those scenarios for themselves in advance, even if they don't happen, right? But they have already thought through some of the steps they might take if there's a break in their supply chain, if key employees quit, if there's the power outage, or whatever the case may be. You hope that some of those things never happen. But those executives that tend to run through scenarios, either in their own head or with their leadership teams, in terms of what would we do if this happened? Positive and negative. Maybe we have a windfall and we have some extra capital we can invest in a new building or a new lab, or something that's maybe more likely as some sort of unplanned catastrophic event. What would we do in that particular case? How would we respond to that? But just this idea that we executives need to be successful executives will embrace change versus just see it as something that happens to them. They'll
Mm.
look for it. They might even put it in motion in many cases because it's the time and they can capitalize on it and they can get some advantage of that over it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really comes back to organizational culture as well, and what sort of culture the leaders are cultivating. And that's why it's so important to cultivate agile cultures, cultures that are really open and quick to adopt change, right? Whether it's happening because they've chosen to make a deliberate change, or it's sort of an external force and it feels like it's happening to them, but that there's an openness and that they view change as always an opportunity, right? So, even a crisis can be an opportunity for innovation, an opportunity for change. And I'll give you a real life example that I'm currently working on, which is as a result of some of the recent executive orders that have rolled back diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, both at the federal level and for federal contractors. And that has had, of course, a trickle down effect into private sector companies. I've been talking with a lot of organizations and nonprofit leaders who are working in the women's leadership space or have had
Mhm.
women's leadership programs for many, many years about, okay, so now we have these executive orders in place. What does that mean for our women's leadership programming? What does that mean for, our programming that supports diversity in the workplace? And, at a very guttural level, this is often quite upsetting for people who work in that space. And yet, as we sort of rise out of our own emotional responses, we can look at this as an opportunity to innovate and to adapt and maybe do things slightly differently while still
Mhm.
maintaining, some of the benefits and addressing the needs and the asks of the employees that really value this type of programming. So that's I think, a wonderful example of just sort of finding the opportunity within a challenge or within a crisis, it may even feel like for some organizations, but coming back to the principles and looking at through this of like, okay, well, if this not possible, what is possible, right? And what can
Mhm.
we do that still is in alignment with our values as an organization, but is in responsive to the changing environment?
Yeah, I was. we were working with a client recently, and we were talking about some of the changes that were happening to her organization. And she mentioned that some of the individuals tend to complain about, the sort of playing a victim in a way. And so like how to kind of get your team to think differently about change, think about that opportunity that exists. I always used to think that, there's really little value in complaining about something, right? I want to very quickly move to putting something in action, even if it's not perfect, right? Finding that opportunity, finding something to act on that I don't feel like I'm just stewing in whatever the problem is that exists today. We can't necessarily affect everything that's happening around the world in Washington or even down the street, right? But we can take some sort of an action. We can look at the situation. We can try to find opportunities or areas of advantage for us, or even just some action we can take that will drive a positive result. So I think, Christina, about this idea about like how do leaders help their teams to accommodate change, right? Is perhaps one is acknowledge it, but don't let them stew in it, right? Don't allow it to become a victim mentality and a complaining session with the team about all the disastrous things that are going to happen, right? It has to be finding the actions, those opportunities that how does a leader help by asking the questions, what opportunities do we see here? What can we be doing? What actions can we be taking based upon our skill set, our experience, our advantages in the marketplace or in the organizations in the space that we're in? What could we be doing now? And as soon as people start moving and start doing, and they get the support that they need, things tend to even themselves out, right? Because then people feel as though they're working on a productive solution toward the problem versus just wallowing in, you know, every day getting up and watching the news saying, "Oh my goodness, what's happening? What can I do?" I think that it can be action oriented. The leader can help drive that through the questioning and involving their team members, and asking them to help to come with solutions and ideas for action.
Yeah, and what you're really driving home, John, through this conversation is just the importance of mindset, right? The
Mhm.
mindset of the individual leader, and then the mindset of the people, of the employees, and how, as I start to think about our conversation here, when you're hiring someone, regardless of what level in the organization you're hiring them, like that's a quality you should be looking for in a new hire is that growth mindset, that openness, that
Mhm.
ability to sort of step back and detach from a situation and look for the possibilities and
Mhm.
to innovate and to pivot, right? And to do so quickly, that agility. And that's perhaps the soft skill is perhaps something that's harder to measure, but it is such a critical success factor given the world that we live in now, coming back to the start where it's like, this is actually now just the status quo. This is it. So if you're looking for that quality, as you're bringing in a new leader, or as you're developing and cultivating your people, that I think is going to help propel an organization into the future, right? That's what's going to separate those that continue to thrive, and find ways to adapt and still be successful, and those that unfortunately, for whatever reason, don't make it.
Yeah. I think that's a really actually a good point about looking for those people, that type of mindset as you're hiring, right? I mean, I always used to when I was interviewing people, interviewing for them for the successes they had, but also like really digging into like what failures that they had and how did they deal with them authentically. Because the more people have been able to work their way out of failure, the better. I used to, I was a golfer when I was younger, and I had a friend of mine that once told me, he says, "John, you are the most unbelievable player out of trouble." meaning I would hit the ball and it'd be off in the woods or in the sand or in the water or whatever. And for somehow I would be able to get a decent score by the end of the day. Because I learned how to scramble out of trouble. And I think that as leaders, unless you've had failures, it's very, very difficult to deal with the next one that you have in front of you. Because once you learn the skills and you get the confidence that says, yeah, well, I was able to deal with the COVID, right? So now we've got tariffs. It's just another thing. It's another wave, but you dealt with the last wave. You know how to do it, and you can remind your team, hey, we were successful, and we were able to you know survive and thrive in that environment, and we're going to be able to do it again. That's the kind of like supportive type of environment that I think that successful leaders create in their companies.
Absolutely agree.
So, Christina, I know we're getting close to the end, so I wanted to just ask you if you have any sort of final thoughts, anything that's been on your mind in this subject area or about this topic, anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, as we've been talking, I mean, I naturally come back to the work that you and I do, John, and both the coaching space and the consulting space, and how, coaching is really such a powerful tool in, in the world that we live in supporting leaders with those foundational elements, right, of their own well-being, but also their mindset,
Hmm.
and their ability to quickly pivot and adapt and innovate, and how coaching is a great organizational tool as well to sort of cultivate the mindset that is critical success factor I just mentioned, and how really just again it comes back to being able to listen, to hold space, right, to affirm and to then challenge, right, to challenge whether it's the individual or the organization, to look for the possibilities, to think beyond, their usual perspectives. And
Yeah,
that's
the
really, go ahead.
no, I was just thinking that many of the clients that we have in this space, the leadership coaching space, are looking to develop those skills, those maybe I would say soft skills or emotional intelligence skills, to be multidimensional, right? To have practice situational leadership. There may be times where you need to be really tough and very direct with people, and there are other times where you need to have create that space for them so that they still feel connected with the team and they understand that they're bringing value and what their place is within the organization. And comes back to that idea of trust and reading the other day this idea about thick trust, right? How do you create thick trust in an organization so no matter what happens, they know that you as a leader will do the best the best thing for the collective group and for the organization. It's and for leaders that are looking to develop more of that, I mean, coaching is certainly a good option for them for their development.
Well, thank you again, John, for inviting me back to your podcast and into this conversation.
Well, thank you. I think you always bring great insights, Christina, and I do appreciate these types of conversation. I'm sure there'll be many others, some of the best podcasts that we've produced so far. So thank you so much. All right, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, John.